Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. We seem to keep doing this, Byron, but this podcast can be in two parts again.
Well, we have our guests to blame for that. They just simply can't stop talking. On a positive note, at least you as the listener get to hear us a little less, which can only be a good thing. The array of topics is vast as always. We're going to look at the lead shot debate, both with shotgun cartridges and non-lead alternatives in rifle ammunition. We're going to discuss the European move to ban all semi-automatic weapons, and we're also going to be looking at the legislation change to license air rifles in Scotland. That's not all. The justification for trophy hunting is going to be part of our discussion, as well as Cecil the Lion. Yes, that story hasn't gone away yet. We're going to bring in shooting the largest elephant in modern times, as well as what would happen if trophy hunting was banned. And we're talking about the global perspective, not just Africa. We're going to name drop with a couple of historical hunters who were a big part of conservation globally. Names such as Teddy Roosevelt, Frederick Courtney Selous, and Jim Corbett, as well as give some excellent examples of how hunting has saved species in modern times. Hunting for conservation is certainly going to be a focus for this podcast, and we're going to be looking at the news that South Africa has opened up the trade of rhino horn. That is going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, and we're going to go into some detail about how that may affect poaching across Africa. This podcast is supported and brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. Jens, welcome to our Into the Wilderness podcast. It's really great that you could find some time to join us. I know you're a very busy man all around the world doing all manner of fantastic things. Just for those people who don't know, Jens and I met earlier this year, although I think we'd probably been aware of one another for some time in journalistic circles. And we met in Namibia. When was it? It was the summer this year, Jens?
It was in June, and thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure.
This is really exciting.
It's a pleasure. No, the meeting you in Namibia was, well, I mean, it was a great trip from start to finish. We were there testing non-lead ammunition for Norma, which fits perfectly into part of the discussion that we're going to be having today with the lead ammunition debate. But the one thing that really struck me, having a chance to have a conversation with you over that week, was that we definitely shared a train of thought with regards to conservation and hunting and how that should be portrayed in the media and how it's not being portrayed in the media. So it'll be a really good opportunity for us today to get those thoughts out into the wider media. But before we get into the sort of real nitty-gritty and the hardcore of conservation and hunting and all the facts and figures, I thought we'd start with something slightly more light-hearted. Now, I know that you were part of a social experiment, I suppose you would call it, with this Castaway project up west of Harris.
Yeah, that's true.
Tell me about that. How did that come about, and the experience? How was that for you?
Well, it was. We were a couple of European gun and outdoor riders who were invited to what we basically thought was a deer hunt, a stag hunt on the Isle of Harris, or rather on a small island off the Isle of Harris. And we were taken by surprise because it turned out that these 3 days of hunting were not, in fact, 3 days of hunting with a nice lodge on the coast. It was a surprise survival course led by an ex-SAS survival trainer. So that was something entirely different and an experience that I really personally learned a lot from. I think everybody there did. It was a new experience and a nice thing for a traveling hunter to actually learn quite a lot about how to cope in unforeseen situations like that. So it was completely different, you could say, yeah.
So I was just going to say, I've spent a lot of time on the west coast and particularly the islands, and there isn't an awful lot there. If I'm being honest, some of the islands don't even have trees because it's that windy. Some of them won't have rabbits or anything. So I mean,
what was the sort of survival situation? You were given nothing, weren't you, apart from the clothes that you stood up in and a rifle?
Yeah, we had nothing, and unfortunately, we also had rules because there was plenty of sheep on that island, so surviving wouldn't have been that difficult. But we were not allowed to shoot the sheep, and hinds and calves were still out of season, and 6 hunters had one stalker with them, so we were a bit limited in the hunting possibilities. To be honest, I'm quite certain that we were not actually meant to shoot a stag the first evening, because then the experience would have been quite different. So I think things worked out exactly as the organizer wanted it to. So we shot one stag for the whole group the last morning, and actually went without food for 2.5 days. So we collected some seashells on the beach, and basically learned how to start fires in wet, windy, put up shelters, purify water, all that kinds of stuff that you don't normally get to experience. But you never know when the situation arises, and it's we had a bit of a difficult situation there actually, because we took shelter on the mountainside, and as you said, it's very, very windy. There was no trees whatsoever, and on the first night we had the remains of a hurricane coming over the island, so we had quite a stormy night there under a tarp, which was not what the organizer expected, but we had the real survival experience, at least for a couple of hours there on the mountain.
No, I actually saw the pictures of your tarp. It didn't quite look as dry and comfortable as the tent that Daryl and I have been staying in this week. But tell me, did everybody? I mean, I didn't know. I knew a couple of the people who you were there with, but not everybody. Did everybody cope well with it and sort of take it in their stride, or were there a few people that were sweating a bit in the circumstances? Although obviously your life was never at risk because you had organizers.
I mean, we had a single sort of semi-casualty. We lost a Spanish rider on the first day. He twisted his knee, and I did offer actually to use one of my 3 bullets on him, but it turned out that they actually had an Arco cat, so he was evacuated on the first evening. But otherwise, everybody coped well, very well. And we met up with the guy afterwards, and he was still breathing and still happy, and everybody coped very well. So, and as the survival instructor told us, it's not really a problem to cope without food for 3 weeks actually. So, and we only did a little less than 3 days, so everything was fine with us, and was plenty of water on the island as well. Yeah,
I was just going to ask you. So I mean, as a survival experience, there was plenty of food, there was plenty of water, but the one thing, the weather is always going to get you. That's the thing. I mean, if you don't have a proper shelter, the weather is going to get you, no matter what you're wearing.
Exactly. It's as he said, he was being very frank with us from the very beginning, and he focused very much on the rule of 3. He called it. You can survive 3 minutes without oxygen. You can survive 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. So those were our priorities, and we had plenty of oxygen, I can tell you that.
Now, just before, I just realized that the other thing that I wanted to speak to you about, so that people could get an idea of where you've come from, before we start talking about things like the ethics of hunting and trophy hunting, is your background, because I know from speaking to you that, and I was maybe a little bit surprised, you don't come from a background where, lots and lots of hunting was fully ingrained in, every part of your upbringing. So can you just tell us what your story is and how you ended up where you are now as editor of a big hunting magazine and hunting all around the world?
Absolutely. No, I grew up in a family without any hunting traditions whatsoever. We don't have any ancestors who ever hunted. I mean, we do, but like everybody else, it's 200 years ago or something like that. We don't know a lot about that. So my parents, my grandparents, none of them have ever been hunters. Actually, my father is a keen anti-hunter, to be honest. Not so much that he hates me or doesn't want to see me, but we have a lot of pretty hefty discussions, and he's not eating anything I shoot. So that's about the level I'm challenged with. It's quite friendly, but hectic sometimes.
Close to home.
So I grew up on my parents' farm, and north of Copenhagen in Denmark, and obviously there was plenty of wildlife there, and we had this farmhand helping us out, who was a hunter, and my father had to allow this old man to keep on hunting on half the property, and obviously little Jens went out hunting with him, and got interested and developed an interest in firearms as well. So that was how I kind of slipped into the hunting world. And in Denmark, you're allowed to take your license when you're 16. I did that to my father's regret. And then I got my first firearms and simply started hunting. When I was 20 something, 24, something like that, I started my own hunting magazine in Denmark, a printed magazine. And as much as my father hates hunting, he liked the idea of me getting into the media world. So he actually went into business with me. So we established a company called Jens Høgh and Father Limited, to publish this hunting magazine. And this was in the mid-90s. So that's how I got into the hunting media. My background is more technical. I studied to be a mechanical engineer, civil engineer, which has helped me a lot in regards to all the technical issues. I'm still very much interested in that, but my hunting passion took over, I guess you could say, and it's for me, it's more and more big game hunting with the rifle around the world, and it's more and more trying to get the positive sides of hunting exposed.
Jens, we lost you for a moment there. That's the beauty of long-range connections when we don't have somebody in the studio. But you were just saying that your focus these days tends to be big game hunting with a rifle.
Yeah, I hardly hunt with my shotgun anymore. Actually, we moved to Sweden a couple of years ago, and we don't have a lot of small game here, so it's been more and more the rifle, and I'm traveling more and more as well, and also focusing very hard on trying to expose all the positive sides of hunting in mainstream media, actually. But I think we'll get back to that later. So for now, I'm more and more a traveling big game hunter, you could say. I would actually like to take up small game hunting more, but I don't really have the opportunity to do that. So my focus is on the big game at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I think that leads us nicely into one of the topics, which was, it may seem a little bit dated now, but you are the perfect person to speak to about this, because I know that you did appear, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Danish TV talking about Cecil Line?
Yeah.
I mean, the Cecil the Lion story. A lot of time has passed since that story first came out.
We keep coming back to it because of the importance of it.
Yeah, I mean, it has changed a lot in the way public perception is about big game hunting, or certainly brought it to the forefront. And now that a bit of time has passed, I think we pretty much have the true story, which is quite far removed from the story that came out in the sort of sensationalist media. But what was your take of it then? Now, and I unfortunately I couldn't understand what you were saying.
No.
Although I did watch your interview because it wasn't in English.
No, exactly. No, my take on it in the beginning was that I was being very skeptical to the whole story from the very beginning, because it struck me that some of the so-called facts that came up in the media just couldn't be true. So I was being very skeptical and basically didn't want to comment on the specific case on those grounds, because it was very confused. My suspicion, as I said on TV, was that I I thought that this was more or less. I suspected that this was more or less a very normal lion hunt in Zimbabwe that had been blown totally out of proportions, and eventually it turned out to be exactly that. So I was more or less commenting on lion hunting in general, and my stance then and now is that it's extremely important that we keep hunting the lions, hunting the elephants, hunting the rhinos, hunting all the animals that we can in a sustainable manner. I mean, we built up a system over the last 4 decades that is so important to conservation, to the funding of the conservation effort, that it's we would basically kill the African wildlife and its habitats if we just dump that system now. And I see absolutely no reason other than hysteria to create the kind of shitstorms we've seen. Cecil the Lion is only one of them. I mean, we had several such.
Yeah, we've had the elephant recently.
Yeah, I mean, we were speaking to David about the elephant. 40, in our media,
it came out like they'd shot the last great tusker, but I mean, the truth is that a lot of we'll talk about the elephant situation in Africa in a little while, I think, because it's very different to what the public perception is. But that was another example of sensationalist headlines without any substance and making people think with their heart and emotions as opposed to their head.
Exactly. And the mainstream media unfortunately loves that, because they struck a nerve. I mean, when they can give a name to an animal like Cecil, or for some peculiar reason, if the hunter is a non-standard trophy hunter, especially if it's a woman, then you have the shitstorm going already. So you can have 100 sweaty men, Russian billionaires, sitting by their trophies without nothing happen. But if you have one good-looking girl killing a giraffe, then you have your shitstorm going. I mean, this is nobody can predict when and where. Just that they want to sell a lot of newspapers.
Well, it's easy to sell a newspaper if you've got a pretty girl standing next to something dead, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Because it shocks people and it's not what they expect. It's a good recipe for big numbers. I mean, and they know this all over the world. So we as hunters have to really start thinking hard about how to prevent these shitstorms, because the frequency is increasing. It's once a month now.
And I guess that would probably go hand in hand with your own social media management. of what you put online, because everybody knows that if you put a picture up that might be distasteful to the rest of the world on social media, there's a high chance it could be picked up and used against you. So I guess as a hunter, you've actually got to be very thoughtful of what you put out there yourself.
We see that a lot, Jens, and I'm sure you probably see it from your side of the pond as well, where we see pictures on social media coming from British, some of them I wouldn't even really call hunters, but people involved in shooting. And we all know exactly what's entailed in it, and we all know what the end result is. But there is a way to approach it, and I think that there are quite a number of people that seem to, certainly from their social media profile, glorify the gore of hunting, and that has nothing to do with hunting apart from the fact it is a process that you've got to go through. Everybody knows that there's blood and what happens when you actually kill something, but you're not glorifying that. That is a byproduct of the end result, and it's not what should be glorified. I mean, do you see that as well?
We see that a lot. Unfortunately, you don't need to pass an IQ test to become a hunter, do you? I mean, to be frank, some of these guys are really stupid, and they are really stubborn in they're insisting to show the goriest picture that they can come up with, constructing more or less really graphic images just to provoke the public because they think it's their right, but they're doing a whole lot of damage to our cause, to the hunting cause. I mean, this is actually more damaging to us than a lot of the stuff the antis are doing, because it comes from within. We cannot deny that they have a hunting license, and we are really putting a lot of efforts that could be used better otherwise in explaining and distancing ourselves from that kind of stuff. And it takes a lot of effort, and it's really bad, but I don't think there's any way to avoid it, unfortunately. It's a very small minority of hunters who acts this way, but they simply won't go away. And the more we tell them to go away, the more stubborn they get.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And I think, as a hunting public as a whole, we just need to be very clear of the fact that those type of people and the activities that they're involved in, and even if you want to extend that to the furthest degree, there are some people with hunting licenses who are involved in illegal activities, as you have in any sect of society. They are not part of our group. And if they want to do that, they must realize that they will get absolutely no support from us.
And when they get caught, they should be prosecuted.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem with increasing the punishments for illegal activities. I've always said that there are some laws, and we're going to talk about potential new laws that are going to come in soon, that may be wrong as far as we're concerned. We may not agree with them, but we have to work within the system of the law, whatever country you're in. If you don't agree with it, it doesn't mean you should break it. It means you should work hard to change it. And I think people need to realize that.
Exactly, and it's a culture thing, because I think most of the hunters are now slowly realizing that we cannot hide it anymore. A lot of the hunters in Scandinavia has been hiding for years and years, especially before social media really grew strong. If nobody talked about the downside of hunting, then it wasn't really a problem. But now with social media, everybody has to decide for himself or herself what we're going to do about the situation, and we really, as you say, need to distance ourselves from anything, first of all, illegal, unethical, and stupid. I mean, a lot of this is plain stupidity, and it's simply not acceptable in the current situation, because all of us are under great pressure. I mean, There's really the anti-hunters are well organized, and they have an easy job. It's very easy to agitate a lot of non-hunters with the right pictures, and it's very difficult for us as hunters to do the opposite. Because we do kill animals, and we do it because it's a passion for us. I mean, the anti-hunters always say we do it for fun, just to use the lowest expression they can. But there is a grain of truth in it, because we do not do it because we have to. We do it because it's our passion, it's our lifestyle, it's something we want to use our spare time for. So from that angle, we have a challenge, and as you say, that challenge is not becoming smaller with idiots in our own ranks not appreciating that we have to think now.
It makes it easier for them if all the information's laid out on social media. They don't need to look hard because some idiots posted something and they go, hang on, look what he's done, and they've given it to him.
Exactly.
And like I said,
exactly.
they're not
and it
part
happens
of...
all the time.
And just to pick up on something you were saying there, you're absolutely right. We enjoy what we do. You can't deny that. We're not doing it because we don't enjoy it. I love to hunt. But I don't take, and I've said this before, I'm repeating something I said in another podcast, I think it was probably with David a couple of weeks ago, is I really enjoy hunting, but I don't take any enjoyment out of the taking of life. But that is a byproduct of hunting, and it's always as part of a management plan, and there is an end game and the end result, and that end result is I'm putting food in my stomach that I know exactly what's happened to it from start to finish. And you're right, we don't have to do it. We can go to the supermarket. Anybody can go to the supermarket. But my point is, and I'm sure that you'll agree with this, is that as hunters, we are 100% in touch with our own destiny, if you like, of survival. And we don't have to do it because the supermarket is just round the corner. But anybody who is happy to go into a supermarket and take, meat from the counter can't really criticize somebody who is prepared to go and take that meat from its live form and put it in your fridge.
Absolutely not. This is just a matter of taking responsibility for the meat on your plate. I mean, if you just go to the supermarket, pick up the meat, you are as much a killer as anybody in that chain. I mean, because if people stop eating meat tomorrow, no animals will be killed for meat. I mean, it's really that simple. So what we do as hunters is simply taking a responsibility for the meat we eat, and I think that's a very important point for us to press, because the ones buying it in the supermarkets has no idea what kind of life and what kind of death those animals had, and still they're causing the animals death by buying the meat. So it's simply. I mean, it's much more simple than people like to think. And as you said about the killing, I do not know a single hunter, honestly, and I know literally hundreds of hunters. I do not know a single one who takes pleasure in actually killing. It's an acceptable part of the chain. It's a part of hunting. It's not the main part of hunting, but it's definitely a necessary part of the chain from the woods to the plates, and it's something we accept. It's something we can live with, and I think that's where we lose a lot of non-hunters, because they are so far away from the concept of killing things that they simply cannot understand our acceptance, and they confuse it with joy. So instead of us realizing the facts of life and death, it becomes us killing for fun, which
pleasure,
is two very, very different things.
And of course, they don't see it when you go out and you're going to hunt a deer. They don't see you walking on the hill for 7 hours, shooting it and it's raining sideways. Then you have to get it down, and it's another 4 or 5 hours getting it off the hill. And you've had to put a whole day, potentially a few days of effort to get your food.
Exactly. No, and that's the problem, because they see the picture of the hunter and the dead animal, and that's it. And this is where we, and especially film producing guys like you, have a big job, because you work in a media where you can actually show the efforts that are put into a hunt much better than a picture of a dead animal. So I think that's one of the things we as hunters should be focusing even more on, to tell the whole story, because that's what the general public is missing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
They
sorry.
Yeah. No, they just get the gory pictures. That's it.
Yeah, no, we were talking about this with David a couple of weeks back, and there has been a number of films come out recently that have gone to a lot of effort to really show the story. Now, there's a lot of hunting clips out there. If you go on YouTube and Google the internet, you'll find a lot of hunting stuff which is just focused on the death.
That's all it is.
And that, I think, that really hasn't helped hunting, because it is basically amplified the one part of it which the media can pick up and do exactly what you've been talking about, which is make it look like it's entirely for pleasure. And to be totally fair about it, how can you say that it's anything other than if that's the only thing that you're putting up? If you're only putting up the death, surely that must be the only thing that you care about, because that's what you've put up on the internet. But there are a few guys out there who are putting together films now that really show the story, and that is what hunting is all about, the story. But I tell you, I just want to backtrack a little bit, because I'm conscious of the fact that we didn't really cover this in detail when we were talking about Cecil the Lion. We kind of just glossed over it. Was that part of it, and big game hunting, has connotations of trophy hunting. Now, trophy hunting is the one thing that is picked up in the media. That's why they've shown pictures of Cecil. That's why they showed pictures of the big elephant that was shot. I think that was in Zimbabwe as well, which was the biggest elephant in modern times that's been shot and certainly plastered over social media. And it's the reason why you have the females, attractive females lying down with their giraffes, because it's a trophy picture.
Yeah.
The justification for trophy hunting, there is a long list of justification, but what's your take on it? If you're asked to justify trophy hunting to a room full of general public who think that trophy hunting is simply barbaric because people just want stuff on their wall, what do you say to them, Jens?
I think it's very important to not mix everything up. I think the single hunter's motives to go hunting is basically doesn't mean anything. It's if you have 100 hunters, you have 100 motives for hunting, and it's not really important to me why they go hunting. So there might be some hunters who are very, very trophy focused on the trophies, and there is definitely a lot of hunters who are very focused on the total experience. My take on trophy hunting is that it's such an important way to fund wildlife habitat, wildlife protection all over the world. That is priority one. It's a good way to get money. And the trophy hunting is a good way for the communities around the world to manage their wild game populations. And what the individual hunter thinks and why he does it. Probably there's a lot of assholes among hunters, as there are good people. So why bother, as long as the end result is conservation, and really there's no alternative funding in place anyway. So I I do not really understand this focus on the individual hunter's motives, because I really honestly think it doesn't matter at all.
You know
Yeah.
that people listening to this will probably think that you and I have had this discussion 10 minutes before coming on the podcast, because
But Byron has mentioned exactly the same
it's
thing.
a total echo of what I said maybe 2 months ago on another podcast. And so obviously I totally agree with you. The individual motives of the person is neither here nor there if the end result is, as you said, part of conservation, part of a management plan. You can detest the individual person. I can detest them as a hunter. You can detest them as a hunter. But you can't detest the process of trophy hunting, because it has a greater good.
And there's a lot of rules and regulations in place here. So we know that in general, the end result is very positive. Of course, there's mishaps and there's corruption here and there, and there's all kinds of problems. But we know from 4 decades of experience that this is a very, very efficient way to protect wildlife. End of story. And I can look at some American hunter or some Russian hunter sitting in his big hall and trophies, and I can think, okay, this guy could just as easily be a stamp collector. But why do I care? I mean, he literally paid millions and millions of dollars directly to wildlife conservation. So honestly, I don't care. My take on trophy hunting is that I keep most of the trophies from the hunts I'm on as a memento. I'm not really interested in sizes and medals and what have you. But why would I care if anybody else is interested in that? Not at all. I mean, they can do as they want, as long as the end result is just what it is: conservation.
And of course, it's not just conservation, especially in Africa as well. It's employment as well. Huge amount of employment goes with these hunts.
Definitely, and I mean, if you have trophy hunting, you need to have big game populations, and with big game population, you need to manage them. So in either case, you need to take out a lot of animals. You need to distribute a lot of meat, which is desperately needed on that continent. So there's a lot of super positive sides to this. And the hunter's motives is by far the least important aspect of this.
I mean, I think a good example of the effect is Zambia closed hunting for 2 years. I think it was 2012 to 2014. I might be a year out. I can't quite remember. I don't have my notes in front of me.
Yeah, something like that.
And they closed it because of the same reasons that Botswana have closed now. Pressures from anti-hunting groups and Green Party type people in their parliaments. They very quickly turned that round and opened it up again because their population in the rural communities was starving. And it's that simple fact. Their population were begging them to open up hunting again because most of those hunting concessions, and this is true across most of Africa, part of the agreement of having those hunting concessions is that they give a certain proportion of their meat away. I know in Botswana and Namibia it certainly was 50%, or it had to be at least 50%.
Yeah.
And in some of those places, apart from fish, there's no other source of protein. So if you're not being given the protein, you then have to make money to buy the protein. But now there is no employment either. So they literally were starving. And so they had to open up hunting again. And on top of that, as you know, if you don't have employment in areas and you're hungry, the first thing you do is go and poach. The bushmeat trade, the snares, gin traps, you name it, any kind of iron work that's going to catch animals, and it's all very indiscriminate. There's absolutely no management involved in trapping animals in that way. That goes on. And your populations don't go up because you're not hunting, they crash. And that's simple facts, and I don't know why people who are very happy to jump on the bandwagon to bash hunting don't just take the few minutes to make sure that they are, talking about the right things, and they've actually looked at the right facts, because these numbers are out there, and there's been some very good reports. There was a university in America actually used the 2-year closure of Zambia as a study for protein intake and employment and population of game in those areas during this closure, and the evidence is there. I'll put the link in the podcast at the end to say which university it was and where you can get the information from. But I mean, it's facts.
Yeah, but absolutely facts. And as I said, it's 4 decades of experience from, especially all over Africa, not only Africa actually, but no, it's very, very simple facts. And the really amazing thing here is that there's hardly any exceptions. The countries who embrace managed trophy hunting as a way to fund wildlife habitats are experiencing increasing populations, and the countries who ban the trophy hunting industry are experiencing the opposite. Poaching and populations are dropping. I mean, it happens again and again and again, and still we have this pressure. And I think it's really scary to think that for some of these so-called green organizations, they are more focused on individual hunters' motives than on conservation, because they have the figures as well. They know what happened in Kenya when they banned hunting. They know what happened in South Africa when they really decided to invest heavily in the hunting industry. And country by country, you have the facts all the way, and still they are mainly focused on individual hunters' motives, or rather the anti-hunters' perception of the hunters' motives. And that's scary, because I find it a lot more interesting to actually save the last rhinos, lions, elephants, what have you, than to start a big ethical discussion about who is the worst person and who is the best person. I mean, that's completely uninteresting.
Yeah, I couldn't remember what the example was, but I remember you gave me a really good example of a species that had been saved somewhere in one of the Stan countries. I can't remember if it was a type of ibex or.
No, it's the world's biggest wild goat, the markhor.
Markhor, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and the situation for the markhor is in Central Asia, in all those little mountainous Stan countries out there, and the thing was that the local population simply saw them as competitors to their sheep and goat, their livestock. So they poached them for meat, to the brink of extinction. And this Danish trophy hunter, this is actually quite a while ago. It must have been at least 2 decades ago. He went there because he really wanted to hunt a markhor, and they were so close to extinction that there was not a chance that he would get a CITES permit for that. So instead he went there, and he went to the best and one of the last areas where these animals live. This was in Pakistan, and he gave the local chief, or warlord, or whatever you call it, a big amount of money in order to stop poaching the markhors, and he told them that he would come back every year and give him a similar amount until there was enough markhors to hunt. And this actually worked out. So I don't know how many years later he actually got the first markhor license through CITES, because the population exploded. Suddenly it was worth something not to poach the markhors, and by now all the subspecies of markhors are increasing. They just downgraded the threat level, so it's not as critically endangered as it was, and they're issuing a few licenses every year to fund all this. This is a huge success story. um, actually bringing back a species from the brink of extinction to not by now a fully healthy big population, but we're absolutely getting there fast.
And it's kept sustainable through hunting.
Yeah, only through hunting, because I mean, who in their right mind would go to the center of Pakistani mountains to trek, to be an eco-tourist? Nobody dares to do that. Only hunters are stupid enough to travel to dangerous places of their world to follow their passion. I mean, nobody else is spending a dollar there. Nobody.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because the one thing that always gets thrown up, whether it's mainly Africa that this comes up, but it would be true of any part of the world, is why do you have to kill it? Why can't you take a picture of it? Let's revert from hunting to ecotourism and take people in on photographic safaris, and they'll take pictures of it. But what a lot of people don't realize is, firstly, the ratio, and again, these numbers are out there, you can go and check. The ratio is about 10 to 1. So you need about 10 photographic safari individuals for one hunter to bring in the same amount of income. But secondly, the footprint and damage that they actually cause to the environment is obviously 10 times more, because you need 10 times the amount of people for the same amount of income coming into that area. And lastly, these photographic safaris tend, 9 times out of 10, occur in the areas where the highest densities of population are. So they never really get to these far remote...
In the national parks.
Yeah, mainly a lot of them are in the national parks, which are funded through wildlife organizations anyway. So all these concessions, like Botswana is a perfect example of it. Most of those hunting concessions now are closed down because there's no hunting anymore. 1 or 2 of them have stayed open for photographic safaris, but where are they? They are where the highest densities of population are. So now there is nobody looking after those areas that would have hunters in week on week. They would be managed for populations, and of course, and this is the one thing that people often don't realize, is that those people who had the hunting concessions spend a huge amount of time, investment in personnel and money throughout the year picking up poaching ironwork to prevent animals from dying.
Absolutely. And another thing which people don't realize is that when you put a lot of value on an animal for a trophy hunter, it means that you need a lot of animals. You need a big population to get to the point where you have old bulls to hunt. And the good thing about trophy hunting here is that you actually have to have these big populations, because you do kill animals off the top. If you didn't kill the animals, you wouldn't need the big populations. For instance, if you're just taking pictures, I mean, you can take 1 million pictures of the same elephant bull, and you don't need a lot of elephants to do that. You basically need one national park with a good population. But if you have a hunting industry and you want to take out 100 elephant bulls a year, then you need 100 times more elephants in total than for just taking pictures in a national park. So it's very important to the discussion that it's actually a good thing that hunting is actually, it's necessary to kill animals in order to have hunted. And because of that, you need a much, much larger population, which needs much, much larger areas to live in. And it's very simple, but still true. And as you said, take South Africa. You have 4 or 5 national parks in relatively confined spaces, which covers everything. I mean, if they only wanted ecotourism, they didn't need more than that. That's for me the big difference.
And it's important to mention. I mean, we talk about Africa it comes up quite a lot because it's a very good example of a lot of things that we want to demonstrate. But
Yeah.
everything that we've been talking about can be rolled out across the rest of the world and across the rest of the game species that are around. I mean,
Absolutely.
we don't have the same problem that they have with poaching over there because we have a much richer population over here in the UK. But everything that we've talked about still stands. You know, whether you're talking about an elephant in Africa or a majestic red stag in the Highlands, it needs to have a value to stay there, because if it didn't have a value, they would shoot all of the deer and they'd put sheep on the hill. That's the bottom line.
Definitely, and the next problem, and that's also true for the whole world, is that hunting sustains these huge hunting areas, but it's not only game animals living there. I mean, you have all the birds, you have all the plants, you have all the insects, you have everything that the hunter is not really hunting for, but is entirely dependent on these habitats as well. So it's extremely important that we find ways to put value on wildlife, and hunting at the moment is by far the best and most efficient way to do that in most places of the world. Yeah.
You were just talking there about obviously the birds, the insects, the plant life and everything like that, and that's a thing that always bugs me with wildlife charities, is that they only are concerned about specific species, but yet they don't care about all the bugs.
No,
they certainly never mention it. It's never in the headlines.
No,
I mean, a good example is we've actually, and we'll put a link to this as well in the podcast, is we've just made a film for the Angus Glenn's Merlin Group based on 3 reports that were done in Scotland on different estates. And they were reports on biodiversity, and they're all on managed areas, so either purely managed grouse moors or a combination of grouse and deer. And the numbers are there, and they're raw, and they're factual, and they've been done by ecologists, and the numbers don't lie. And those numbers tell you that on those managed areas, there are a huge number of both insects and birds and mammals, which in other areas that are not managed are in decline, or they're amber or red listed species that are doing very, very well in those managed areas.
I mean,
absolutely.
They found a moth that they haven't seen for 40 years up here.
Yeah, just up the road from where we live. Yeah.
And it's all these insects and birds that the animal charities, I mean, here, for example, hen harriers, that's all they bang on about mainly for birds of prey, is where are the hen harriers, who's killed this, why isn't this being managed just for hen harriers?
And it's obviously important. I mean, everybody wants to see them, and it's obviously an important species, and it is a keystone species. But the point, I guess, Daryl is coming across is it's often the only thing you see in the media, and there are other species you could come up with as well that
are key species that they come up with.
Yeah, but they don't talk about the vast spectrum.
They don't talk about.
I guess I mean, do you have the same problem over there in Scandinavia?
Yeah, especially in Denmark and southern Sweden, where we have a lot of agriculture, because in our areas, I mean, you have 2 alternatives. Either you try to have some natural areas for the game, or you have a monoculture of wheat or barley or pine forest or something, which doesn't support really anything. So there's an extreme difference between managed hunting areas and farmland or forest managed for wood production. So we have exactly the same situation here, and exactly as in the UK, the Greens tend to focus very narrowly. In Sweden, the big subject is wolves, so everything is about the wolf. Where I mean, in order to sustain a moose population or population of red deer or roe deer or whatever, we need some pretty good and diverse habitat. And we're talking thousands of species, and not only wolves, but it's exactly the same here. The focus is very narrow, and I think it's because easier for the non-hunter to understand that hen harriers are supposed to be endangered, or we should do some more for the wolves, or whatever. They need these totem animals to focus on, because otherwise it gets too complicated.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, but you took the word out of my mouth there. If you focus on the spectrum, that is really important, and you need a spectrum from the smallest to the biggest, it becomes very complicated to get that message across. So yeah, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
If you can focus on one species in terms of getting the public on side, whatever your message, whatever the message is that you want it to be, it's a lot easier to get that across if you've just got this one name that you can hold up. So yeah, it's an interesting one that we did a podcast. It's not out yet, not while we're recording this, on fishing last week. And one thing that did make me chuckle when we weren't talking about birds, we were obviously talking about fish. It was about fish and aquaculture. And there's an area in Glen Clover. I'm sure they were talking about Glen Clover on the South Esk, where they wanted to do a lot of replanting. This is on the Fisheries Trust that I'm on. Replanting to shore up banks to reduce the amount of silt going in, which covers fish eggs. And they obviously have to speak with a number of interested bodies. There's Forestry Commission up there. There's RSPB. There's Woodland Trust. You name it. There's a lot of interesting. There's a lot of interested parties up there that you have to negotiate with. And the one thing that came out was that they didn't want trees planted in certain areas because...
No, who didn't want trees planted in certain areas?
Well, Marshall... I haven't confirmed this with him, but what Marshall said in the podcast was that the RSPB didn't want trees planted in certain areas because they would be good for raptors, and they didn't want the raptors predating on the waders that were in the bottom of the valley, on the wet sort of marshland. But, where do you pick and choose? Because, waders do very well on managed grouse moors. And as a result of that, so do the birds of prey which predate on them. And now they don't want trees to be planted because it'll be good for the predators, which they're always banging on about in the media. You can't, decide what you want. And it seems that sometimes it's convenient to sort of micromanage the habitat in terms of what impact we can have, and then other times with other organizations it's stand back and leave it alone and let it do as it pleases. So yeah, there's a lot of contradictions going there, but that did make me smile when I thought of that, because it's mainly, in terms of the public perception, it is mainly raptors and birds of prey that are talked about, and yet in this particular instance they didn't want to do something that would have actually benefited them, because then they would go and eat other species which were, red and amber listed.
They do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. We've covered so much so far. I think the last part that I wanted to touch on with regard to conservation and hunters was to just express the fact that although the public probably don't realize it, there's been some of the biggest hunters in history have also been the biggest conservationists. Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah,
he was responsible for setting up the national park system in America. I bet you a lot of Americans don't even know that. And the fact that he probably was one of the biggest hunters that has ever lived. I mean, he did massive safaris. A lot of the stuff that's in museums around the world is as a result of safaris that Teddy Roosevelt did. Salou Game Reserve. Again, if you Google Salou, the first thing you'll come up with is hunting. And of course, Corbett. I mean, Jim Corbett, one of the... I would be surprised if anybody killed any more man-eating lions and leopards than Jim Corbett. But I've been to his national park in India, named in respect to the work that he did, and that national park is the highest density as a tiger in the world.
And only, I think it was last week, Sir David Attenborough was talking about his new TV program, The Hunt, and the presenter was bringing up Cecil the Lion and asked Sir David Attenborough's opinion on it, and he was saying, in fact, we'll get hold of the clip to play, but basically he was saying the first conservationists in Africa, anyway, were hunters. That was from his mouth. They were hunters, the first conservationists.
Yeah, and you have the same situation in Central Europe. In Scandinavia, we have a lot of wilderness still, so it's not quite the same situation here. But in Central Europe, you have some of the less popular characters in history has actually done a lot for hunting. You had the German emperors, the last ones. They set aside huge areas for hunting purposes, which are still existing today. The same with the Austro-Hungarian emperors did the same. Really, really keen hunters. If I recall correctly, the Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand, he killed more than 250,000 animals in his short life. So a hunter he was. Definitely a pretty bad person, but you can still in the landscape down there see huge areas set aside for wildlife due to these kings and emperors. And even Hermann Göring, the head of Luftwaffe, was an extremely keen hunter, and still today in parts of Germany and Poland, you see these huge areas that he actually set aside. He's more or less also solely responsible for the survival of the Wiesent, the European buffalo. They were saved on his initiative.
I think that's a perfect example how you can detest the man but not detest the process.
Exactly. If you look at him isolated as a hunter and conservationist, he actually did a lot of good, and yet he was one of the biggest a-holes in history, and he got what he deserved. But as a hunter and conservationist, well, I have no complaints there.
Well, we've had to stop there. We've run out of time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to Jens, and we will have him on again in 2 weeks' time. Now, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and you'll get it a day early. It's also available on YouTube and SoundCloud. And like we've said before, if there's anything that you want discussed on this podcast, please get in touch with us, paceproductionsuk@gmail.com. Have you enjoyed today, Byron?
I always thoroughly enjoy talking to Jens. The only thing that bothers me is that I don't have long enough, because he always has some very interesting debate, and we've only heard a fraction of his stories. In fact, we haven't really heard any of his stories, and he's got some fantastic stories to tell. So maybe we'll have to just get him on for a storytelling session at some point in the future.
I think we will. I think all of our guests have to come back on again, because they've all been thoroughly enjoyable to speak to, and you learn. You do really do learn a lot.
Yeah, no, it's you always learn speaking to people. Everyone has a different point of view and a different way of looking at things, and it's good. Now, we've had a few people ask us, what is a podcast? You know, we've been telling people about this. What is a podcast? And there is especially, well, our dad. For you tell him what is a podcast. He go, I don't know what a podcast is. So tell someone about this podcast, and if they ask what it is, just explain it's a bit like a radio show. On-demand radio. On-demand radio, that's the best way to describe it, I guess. And introduce someone to this show. That's your challenge. That up to Christmas, you got to introduce someone to this show. Tell someone about it. The best Christmas present you can give, and it's not even going to cost you anything. It's not going to cost you anything. Tell people about it. It's free. And like we said before, get in touch with us on our Facebook page, Pace Brothers Into the Wilderness, or email us for any topics or any feedback that you have about the podcast, and we'll get back in touch with you. And if there's any guests that you want on, let us know that too. Now, I said right at the end there that I would get hold of the clip of David Attenborough talking about hunting and talking about the Cecil Line incident. So here it is. It's an extract taken from BBC Radio 2 only a few weeks back now. Have a listen and form your own opinions. And thank you very much for listening.
Just on the subject of where humans come into this, a lot of people might have thought, yes, I remember that American dentist who was in the news recently, Walter Palmer, I think his name was, who went to Zimbabwe and he shot the lion, and then there was the outrage about that. When you read those stories, So, David, I wonder what your reaction is, because we're horrified, and maybe we take an uneducated view. I don't know, but what do you take?
Well, of course, he didn't knowingly break the rules. He was under the impression that he was legally hunting a lion, my reaction to that, as I suspect many people and yours is that why on earth would you actually want to kill something? And I dare say if I was a psychiatrist or a pop psychiatrist, you would say, well, it gives you the sense of power, and the sense of power is a very intoxicating thing. People relish sense of power. I mean, that's why people seek power. And here is power of life or death, the ultimate power. So that's how you have to explain it. But the notion that you should be pleased with yourself because you actually did that is not very pleasant. I mean, there's an excuse if you've actually, in terms of bushcraft, that you've outwitted a very clever prey. But there are so-called canned lion hunting, in South Africa, where lions are deliberately bred and kept in admittedly large enclosures, but they've never been truly wild, and they are then shot. You buy a license to buy them. I mean, to say it's repugnant is putting it mildly, but it is the case.
It feels like something from a Victorian era when we looked at animals in a completely different way.
Absolutely so, but it's a mistake to think that all the people, those hunters, are necessarily people who, as it were, only like bloodlust. Many of them were great naturalists. I mean, a lot of what we know about carnivores and so on comes from 19th, 20th century hunters who out on foot pursued a lion and shot it. And there was in the 19th century, and indeed the 20th century too, there were plenty of people, reputable people, not people to be despised, who actually enjoyed killing animals. But the fun, if that's what it is in tracking them and putting your wits against theirs and so on. And there is a certain amount of caution you need, because even if you have a gun, I mean, the lion charging you, you better know what you're doing. So that skill. But the interesting thing is that the very, very first conservation-conscious charity, which was called the Fauna Preservation Society, something like that, of the British Empire, was formed by hunters who were aware that they were not being able to find the animals with the biggest horns that they were seeking, because they were actually becoming fewer, and they were on the verge of serious extinction. And it was they that started conservation.
And that was David Attenborough on BBC Radio 2 talking about hunting and conservation. Join us again in 2 weeks for part 2. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for listening. See you in 2 weeks. This podcast has been brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports.